The bullet shattered the water gauge on Penelope Turner's property line, just as the sun crested over the Texas horizon. And she knew, without looking, that Marcus Henshaw's men had arrived to make good on their threats. She stood on the porch of her modest ranch house 3 miles outside Sweetwater, Texas, with her father's Winchester rifle already in her hands. The year was 1884, and water meant life in this part of the country. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving her alone to defend the water rights he had spent 20 years establishing. At 24 years old, Penelope had never imagined she would be fighting off one of the most powerful cattle barons in West Texas. But here she stood, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, her calico dress covered by her father's old leather vest, ready for whatever came next. 3 riders approached slowly from the east, silhouetted against the rising sun. She recognized the lead rider as Clyde Morrison, Henshaw's foreman, a man known for his cruelty and his absolute loyalty to his employer. The other 2 were hired guns whose names she did not know and did not care to learn. "Miss Turner," Clyde called out as they stopped their horses about 30 yards from her porch. "Mr. Henshaw sent us with a final offer, $500 for your water rights to Sweetwater Creek." "That is more than generous." "The answer is the same as it has been every time you have asked," Penelope called back, keeping her rifle pointed at the ground but ready. "My father secured legal rights to that water in 1864. Those rights are not for sale at any price." Clyde spat tobacco juice onto her property and shook his head. "You are making this harder than it needs to be. A woman alone cannot work this land, cannot defend it proper. Mr. Henshaw is being kind, offering you anything at all." "Kindness would be respecting legal documents registered with the county," Penelope said. "Now get off my land." The 3 men exchanged glances, and for a moment she thought they might actually leave. Then Clyde reached for something on his saddle, and Penelope raised her rifle in one smooth motion. Before either of them could make another move, a 4th horse and rider appeared from the direction of the creek, moving at a fast gallop. The newcomer was a cowboy Penelope had never seen before, sitting tall in his saddle on a paint horse, wearing dust-covered traveling clothes and a hat pulled low against the morning sun. He positioned himself between Penelope and Henshaw's men, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "Seems like 3 against 1 are poor odds," the stranger said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Especially when that one is a lady defending her own property." "This does not concern you, Drifter," Clyde said, his hand moving toward his gun. "I am making it my concern," the stranger replied. His posture remained relaxed, but there was something in his bearing that made even Clyde hesitate. "The lady asked you to leave. Seems like the polite thing would be to respect her wishes." Penelope watched the standoff, her heart pounding. She had no idea who this man was or why he was helping her, but she was grateful for his intervention. The 3 hired men seemed to be calculating their odds, and apparently they did not like the math. After a long, tense moment, Clyde pulled his horse's reins. "This is not over, Miss Turner," he said. "Mr. Henshaw always gets what he wants." "Then he is about to learn disappointment," she replied. The 3 riders turned and headed back toward Henshaw's sprawling ranch to the north. The stranger remained where he was until they were out of sight, then turned his horse toward Penelope's porch and dismounted. Up close, Penelope could see he was probably around her own age, perhaps a year or 2 older, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of creek water after a rain. He removed his hat, revealing brown hair that needed a trim. "Ethan Quinn, madam," he said. "I apologize for inserting myself into your business, but I have never been able to stand by when someone needs help." "Penelope Turner," she replied, lowering her rifle but not setting it aside. "I appreciate your assistance, Mr. Quinn, but I have to ask what brings you to my property at such an opportune moment." Ethan smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "Pure chance, actually. I have been riding since before dawn, looking for work. I heard in town yesterday that there might be ranches hiring hands for the season. When I saw those three heading this direction with purpose, I followed on instinct." "You followed three armed men on instinct?" Penelope asked, raising an eyebrow. "I have been told my instincts sometimes override my common sense," Ethan admitted. "Are you all right, Miss Turner? They did not hurt you." "They shot my water gauge, but that can be repaired," Penelope said. She studied him for a long moment, weighing risks against desperate need. "You said you were looking for work," Ethan nodded. "Yes, madam. I am good with horses, decent with cattle, and I can fix most anything that breaks. I have been working ranches since I was 14, from Kansas down to here." "What brought you to Sweetwater?" "Heard it was good country." "Heard wrong about the job prospects, apparently, but I am not one to give up easy." He looked around at her property, taking in the well-maintained barn, the sturdy fences, the small herd of cattle grazing near the creek. "This is a fine place you have here." "It was my father's dream," Penelope said quietly. "He died 6 months ago. Heart gave out while he was mending fence." She made a decision, hoping her own instincts were as good as his seemed to be. "I could use help, Mr. Quinn. I cannot pay much in wages, but I can offer room and board in the bunkhouse and a small salary. The work would include general ranch duties and possibly dealing with more of what you just witnessed." Ethan met her eyes directly. "Those men work for Marcus Henshaw. You know of him." "I know his reputation. He owns about half of West Texas and wants to own the other half." Ethan looked back in the direction the riders had gone. "If I work for you, I will be making an enemy of a very powerful man." "Yes," Penelope said honestly, "you would be. Which is why I would understand if you decline." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then he settled his hat back on his head. "My father taught me that a man's character is defined by what he stands for, not by what he stands to gain. If you are willing to hire me, Miss Turner, I am willing to work for you." Relief flooded through Penelope, though she tried not to show it too obviously. "Then welcome to the Turner Ranch, Mr. Quinn. You can stable your horse in the barn. The bunkhouse is the small building behind it. There is a water pump out back for washing up. I will make breakfast and then I can show you around the property." "I appreciate it, madam." Ethan led his horse toward the barn, and Penelope watched him go, wondering if she had just made the best decision of her life or the worst. Only time would tell. An hour later, they sat across from each other at her kitchen table, eating eggs and bread and drinking strong coffee. Ethan ate with the methodical efficiency of a man who had missed too many meals to ever take one for granted. "Tell me about the water rights," Ethan said. "If I am going to help defend them, I should understand what we are defending." Penelope appreciated his directness. She rose and retrieved a leather document folder from her father's old desk in the corner. Inside were yellowed papers covered in legal writing and official stamps. "My father, Samuel Turner, came to this area in 1863, she explained, spreading the documents on the table. "This land was considered worthless back then. No one wanted it except him. He filed proper claims, paid all fees, and most importantly, he secured legal rights to access Sweetwater Creek, which runs through the eastern portion of this property." She traced a finger along a hand-drawn map. At the time, Marcus Henshaw had not yet arrived in Texas. He came in 1870 with money from back east and started buying up every piece of land he could. By 1875, he owned nearly 20,000 acres surrounding this property. The only water source for miles is Sweetwater Creek. And he needs access to water for his cattle, Ethan said, understanding dawning. Exactly. The creek originates in the hills to the east and flows west across my land before continuing through his. My father's water rights give us first access. Henshaw can use whatever water is left after our needs are met, but in dry years, there is not always much left. So he wants to buy you out or force you out, Ethan said. He tried to buy the land from my father for years, made increasingly generous offers, but my father would not sell. This land was his legacy for me. After he died, Henshaw assumed I would be easier to persuade. Penelope's jaw tightened. He assumed wrong. Ethan studied the documents carefully. These look legitimate and properly filed. Henshaw cannot simply take the water rights legally. No, but he can make my life difficult enough that I choose to leave. He has had his men cut my fences, scatter my cattle, poison a water trough, and now shooting at my property. He has also spread word in town that no one should do business with me. I have had trouble buying supplies, hiring help, and even selling my cattle. How have you managed alone? Ethan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Stubbornness, mostly, Penelope said with a slight smile. And some friends in town who are willing to defy Henshaw quietly. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, still sells to me, though he has to be discreet about it. And Sheriff Coleman has been fair, even if he cannot do much without proof of wrongdoing. What about family? Do you have anyone who could help? Penelope shook her head. My mother died when I was 12. I have an aunt in Missouri, but she is elderly and could not make the journey. It is just me. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Ethan reached across the table, stopping just short of touching her hand, as if he had thought better of the gesture. Not anymore, he said quietly. You have help now. Something in his tone made Penelope's breath catch. She looked at him across the table, this stranger who had ridden into her life hours ago, and felt the first flicker of hope she had experienced in months. But hope was dangerous. Hope could lead to disappointment. We should get to work, she said, standing abruptly. Daylight is burning. If Ethan noticed her sudden change in demeanor, he did not comment. He simply nodded and followed her outside. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Ethan proved to be everything he had claimed and more. He was up before dawn each morning, tending to the horses and cattle with a competence that spoke of years of experience. He repaired the damaged water gauge, fixed 3 sections of fence that had been cut, and even managed to coax Penelope's temperamental milk cow into cooperating without complaint. They worked together during the days, often in comfortable silence broken only by necessary communication. But in the evenings, over simple dinners that Penelope insisted Ethan share with her rather than eating alone in the bunkhouse, they talked. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, about losing his own parents to fever when he was 16, about the years since then spent drifting from ranch to ranch, never quite finding a place that felt like home. She told him about her childhood here, about learning to ride before she could read properly, about her father's patient teaching of everything from tracking cattle to reading the weather. She told him things she had not spoken aloud since her father's death, and found that the telling eased some of the loneliness that had been crushing her. On the 4th day, they were riding the fence line together when Ethan suddenly held up a hand, signaling her to stop. He dismounted and knelt by the ground, studying something Penelope could not see. "What is it?" she asked, staying on her horse as he had taught her to do when he was checking for danger. "Fresh tracks, 4 riders, maybe 5. They have been following the fence line, probably looking for weak points." He stood and looked toward the northeast, his expression grim. "This was this morning while we were working near the barn." "They are watching us," Penelope said, a chill running down her spine despite the warm afternoon sun. "Yes, they want to know our patterns, our routines." Ethan remounted smoothly. "We need to be less predictable, and we need to keep watch at night." That night, Ethan positioned himself on the porch with a rifle and a pot of coffee. Penelope tried to sleep but found herself too restless. Around midnight, she gave up and brought out a blanket and her own cup. "You should rest," Ethan said as she settled into the other chair. "I can handle the watch. This is my land, my fight," Penelope replied. "I will not hide inside while you face the danger alone." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. An owl called from the cottonwoods near the creek. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said finally. "Of course. Why not just sell, take Henshaw's money and start somewhere new, somewhere easier?" He held up a hand before she could protest. "I am not suggesting you should, I just want to understand." Penelope considered the question carefully. "When my mother was dying, she made my father promise that he would give me choices. She had been forced into a life she had not chosen, married to a man she had not loved, before she met my father and found real happiness. She wanted better for me. My father kept that promise. He taught me everything he taught the son he never had. He made sure I could read and write and figure. He left me this land not as a burden but as a choice. If I sell because I am scared, if I let Henshaw bully me into leaving, then I am giving up the very freedom my parents worked to give me." "You could choose to leave and still be free," Ethan pointed out gently. "Yes," Penelope agreed, "but I could not respect myself. And I think that matters more than safety or ease." Ethan looked at her with something in his eyes she could not quite name. "You are remarkable, Penelope Turner." The use of her first name without the formal miss sent warmth through her chest. "I am stubborn, you mean?" "Stubborn, brave, remarkable," he said. "All of the above." She met his gaze and felt something shift between them, like the first movement of a door that had been locked. The air felt charged, full of possibility and promise. Penelope realized she had been leaning toward him without conscious thought, and he was doing the same. Then a horse whinnied from the barn, a sound of alarm, and the moment shattered. They were both on their feet instantly, rifles raised, peering into the darkness. "Stay here," Ethan whispered. "Absolutely not," Penelope replied. They moved together toward the barn, keeping low, using the shadows for cover. As they approached, Penelope could hear the horses shifting nervously in their stalls. Ethan held up a hand, signaling her to stop, then eased open the barn door. The interior was dark except for slivers of moonlight coming through gaps in the walls. Penelope's eyes adjusted slowly, making out the shapes of the stalls, the tack room, the loft above. Everything seemed normal until Ethan moved toward the back and stopped abruptly. "Someone was here," he said quietly. "Look." By the light of the match he struck, Penelope could see fresh boot prints in the dust, too large to be her own or Ethan's. They led to the ladder up to the loft and then back out again. "Checking if we store hay up there, maybe," Ethan said. "Or looking for something else." They searched the rest of the barn but found nothing missing or disturbed. Whoever had been there had not come to steal or sabotage, at least not tonight. "A warning," Penelope said. "They want us to know they can reach us whenever they choose." "Maybe," Ethan agreed. "Or they were gathering information for something bigger." They returned to the house, but neither suggested going to sleep. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Penelope felt exhaustion settling into her bones, but also something else. Having Ethan beside her, facing these threats together rather than alone, made everything feel more bearable. More than bearable, actually. It made her feel alive in a way she had not since before her father's death. The following day, they rode into Sweetwater together. Penelope needed supplies, and Ethan insisted on accompanying her. The town was small, just a main street with a dozen buildings including the general store, a saloon, the sheriff's office, a church, and a few other businesses. As they rode in, Penelope could feel eyes watching them, could sense the whispers starting. At the general store, Mr. Peterson greeted them with his usual cautious kindness. He was a small man in his 50s with wire-rimmed spectacles and thinning gray hair. "Miss Turner, good to see you," he said. "And who is this?" "Ethan Quinn," Ethan said, offering his hand. "I am working at Miss Turner's ranch." Mr. Peterson shook his hand, but his expression was worried. "You know what that means, son, working for Miss Turner." "I do," Ethan replied calmly. "And I stand by my decision." "Brave or foolish, hard to tell which," Mr. Peterson muttered, but there was approval in his voice. He began gathering the supplies on Penelope's list. While they waited, the door opened and 3 men walked in. Penelope recognized them immediately. Marcus Henshaw himself, flanked by Clyde Morrison and another of his hired guns. Henshaw was a large man in his early 50s, with silver hair and expensive clothes that looked out of place in rural Texas. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to getting his way in all things. "Miss Turner," Henshaw said, his voice smooth as oil. "What a pleasant surprise." "Mr. Henshaw," Penelope replied, keeping her tone neutral. Henshaw's eyes moved to Ethan, assessing him with the calculating gaze of a man who sized up everyone he met for potential use or threat. "I do not believe we have been introduced." "No reason we should be," Ethan said flatly. Henshaw's expression hardened slightly. "You must be the drifter who has inserted himself into business that does not concern him." "If you mean I am the man Miss Turner hired to work her legal property and defend her legal water rights, then yes, that is me." "Legal," Henshaw repeated, as if tasting the word. "Miss Turner, surely by now you have realized that legal and practical are not always the same thing. You cannot work that land alone, cannot defend it indefinitely. I am prepared to increase my offer to $1,000. That is more than fair for such a small parcel." "My answer remains no," Penelope said. "It will always be no." "You are being foolish," Henshaw said, his veneer of politeness cracking. "That land is worthless without proper management. You are wasting resources, wasting potential." "The only thing being wasted is your time continuing to ask me," Penelope replied. She took the packages Mr. Peterson had wrapped and handed them to Ethan. "Good day, Mr. Henshaw." She turned to leave, but Henshaw's voice stopped her. "I wonder if you have considered what position you are putting young Mr. Quinn in. Working for you makes him a target. If anything were to happen to him, his blood would be on your hands." Penelope felt ice form in her stomach, but before she could respond, Ethan stepped between her and Henshaw. "I am a grown man capable of making my own decisions and accepting the consequences," Ethan said. His hand rested on his gun, not threatening, just present. "And I do not take kindly to veiled threats." "No threat," Henshaw said, raising his hands in mock innocence. "Merely an observation about the dangers of this country. Accidents happen, especially to those who do not know the territory." "I know danger when I see it," Ethan replied. "Usually wears an expensive suit and hides behind hired guns." Clyde Morrison's hand moved toward his weapon, but Henshaw stopped him with a gesture. "You have fire, I will give you that. But fire burns out, son. Remember that." Henshaw and his men left the store. Penelope realized she had been holding her breath and let it out slowly. Mr. Peterson looked pale. "You two be careful," he said quietly. "Henshaw is not a man to make threats idly." "We will," Penelope assured him. She paid for her supplies and they left. Outside, as they loaded the packages onto their horses, Ethan touched her arm gently. "Are you all right?" I should ask you that, Penelope said. He threatened you directly. He threatened us both, and I meant what I said. I made my choice with open eyes. He helped her mount, his hand steadying her with a touch that lingered just a moment longer than necessary. We are in this together, Penelope. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. But as they crested the hill that gave them their first view of her property, Penelope reined in her horse sharply. Ethan stopped beside her, and she heard him curse under his breath. Her windmill, which pumped water from the underground well to the main trough, lay in pieces on the ground. Someone had taken an axe to the wooden support beams. Without it, she could not efficiently water her cattle. They would have to haul water by hand from the creek, an exhausting and time-consuming task. They rode down quickly and dismounted. Ethan walked around the destruction, his face grim. This happened while we were in town. They were watching, waited until we left. Can it be repaired? Penelope asked, though she could see the answer in the splintered wood. Not repaired, no. It will have to be completely rebuilt. That is weeks of work, even with 2 people. He picked up a piece of wood, examining the axe marks. They were thorough. Penelope felt tears of frustration stinging her eyes, but refused to let them fall. We will start hauling water from the creek tomorrow. Tonight we should check the rest of the property, make sure they did not damage anything else. They spent the rest of the afternoon riding the fence lines and checking every building and structure. Everything else seemed intact, but Penelope knew that was small comfort. The message was clear. Henshaw could strike whenever he wanted, wherever he wanted. That evening, as they sat on the porch after a sparse dinner, Penelope finally let herself feel the weight of it all. The exhaustion, the fear, the anger. She must have made some sound because Ethan was suddenly kneeling in front of her chair, his hands covering hers. "We will get through this," he said firmly. "How?" The word came out almost as a sob. "Every time we fix something, they break something else. Every time we defend one part of the property, they attack another. How long can we keep this up?" "As long as it takes," Ethan said. He moved to sit beside her, his arm coming around her shoulders in a gesture of comfort. Penelope knew she should pull away, maintain the proper distance between employer and employee, but she could not make herself move. Instead, she leaned into him, letting his solid presence anchor her. "I am scared," she admitted quietly. "Not of losing the land, but of someone getting hurt, of you getting hurt because of me. Penelope, look at me." When she did, she found his face very close to hers, his expression serious. "I am not here out of obligation or for the wages. I am here because from the moment I saw you standing on that porch with your rifle, defending what was yours against bad odds, I knew you were someone worth fighting for. This is my choice. My fight now, same as yours." "Why?" she whispered. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you are brave and stubborn and kind. I know you make the best coffee I have ever had and you hum while you cook breakfast. I know you talk to your horses like they are friends, and you always give the barn cat the cream from the top of the milk. I know that every morning you visit your father's grave and tell him about what needs doing that day. I know that you deserve to keep what is yours, and I will stand beside you as long as you will let me." Penelope felt something break open inside her, some wall she had built to keep herself safe from disappointment and loss. "I am starting to care for you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "More than I should, more than is wise." "Why is that unwise?" Ethan asked. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Because this situation, this threat, it makes everything intense. Makes everything feel more than it might be under normal circumstances. What if when this is over, you realize you do not actually feel what you think you feel?" "Penelope," he leaned his forehead against hers. "I have been drifting for 8 years. never found a reason to stop, never found a place that felt like home. Then I rode into Sweetwater and saw a woman who needed help, and something in me just knew, this is where I am supposed to be. You are where I am supposed to be. Ethan. She said his name like a prayer, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning. She answered by kissing him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, full of all the fear and hope and longing they had both been carrying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers again. I am falling in love with you, Penelope Turner. I know the timing is terrible and the situation is complicated, but I cannot pretend I do not feel it. I am falling in love with you too, she admitted. It terrifies me. Everything worth having is a little terrifying, he said with a slight smile. We will figure this out, together. They sat on the porch until the stars came out, talking quietly, stealing kisses, making plans. For the first time since her father's death, Penelope felt like she was not alone in the world. More than that, she felt like she had found something precious and rare, something worth fighting for beyond just land and water rights. The next week was hard work. They hauled water from the creek twice daily, making multiple trips with barrels loaded on a wagon. It was back-breaking labor, but they worked side by side, talking and laughing and learning each other. Penelope discovered that Ethan could not carry a tune to save his life, but sang anyway. He learned that she had a terrible habit of starting projects with great enthusiasm and then getting distracted halfway through. They teased each other and worked together and slowly, steadily, fell deeper in love. Henshaw's men appeared periodically on the edges of the property, watching, making their presence known. But they did not attack again, which somehow felt more ominous than if they had. The waiting, the uncertainty, was its own form of pressure. On Sunday, Penelope suggested they ride into town for church. Ethan looked surprised but agreed. They dressed in their best clothes, Penelope in a blue dress that had been her mother's and Ethan in a clean shirt and vest. At the small church on the edge of Sweetwater, they found the usual crowd of ranchers and townspeople. Henshaw was there too, of course, sitting in the front pew like he owned the building along with everything else. But there were also allies Penelope had not fully recognized before. Mr. Peterson and his wife greeted them warmly. Sheriff Coleman, a weathered man in his 40s with an honest face, nodded respectfully. Even a few of the smaller ranchers offered quiet words of support. After the service, Sheriff Coleman pulled them aside. Miss Turner, Mr. Quinn, could I speak with you a moment? They followed him away from the crowd. The sheriff looked uncomfortable but determined. I want you to know I have been keeping an eye on things. I cannot arrest Henshaw's men without proof, but I am watching. And if you need help, you send word and I will come. Thank you, Sheriff, Penelope said, surprised and touched. That means more than you know. Your father was a good man, Miss Turner, one of the best I have known. He would be proud of how you are standing up for yourself. The sheriff glanced at Ethan, and he would be glad you found someone to stand with you. As they rode home, Penelope felt lighter than she had in weeks. They were not as alone as she had thought. There were people in Sweetwater who cared, who would help if they could. That afternoon, as they were working on rebuilding the windmill, they heard a horse approaching at a gallop. Both reached for their guns, but it was only a young boy, maybe 12 years old, riding bareback on a shaggy pony. Miss Turner, he called as he got closer. Miss Turner, Mr. Peterson sent me. Says you need to come to town right away. Says it is important. What happened? Penelope asked, worry spiking through her. Do not know, madam. He just said come quick. Penelope and Ethan exchanged glances. Could be a trap, Ethan said quietly. Or Mr. Peterson could really need help. Penelope made a decision. You stay here, watch the property, I will go." "Absolutely not," Ethan said firmly. "If you go, I go. We will lock up the animals and go together." They made it to town in record time, their horses lathered with sweat. At the general store, they found Mr. Peterson pacing outside, his face pale. When he saw them, he rushed over. "Thank God you are here. Miss Turner, there is a man inside who says he is a lawyer from the Capitol. He claims he has documents showing Henshaw purchased the water rights to Sweetwater Creek from the territorial government in 1870. Penelope felt the ground tilt beneath her. "That is impossible. My father secured those rights in 1864. They cannot sell what is already claimed." "You need to talk to him," Mr. Peterson said. "He is waiting inside." The man in the store was thin and sharp-featured, dressed in an expensive suit and carrying a leather case. He introduced himself as Amos Rutherford, attorney at law. "Miss Turner," he said, laying papers on the counter. "I represent Mr. Marcus Henshaw in the matter of water rights to Sweetwater Creek. These documents show that, in 1870, the territorial government of Texas sold said water rights to Mr. Henshaw for the sum of $500. Penelope looked at the documents. They certainly looked official, with stamps and signatures and legal language, but something felt wrong. "My father's claim predates this by 6 years, she said. "Prior claims take precedence." "Normally, yes," Rutherford said smoothly. "However, there is no record of your father's claim in the territorial archives. Without documentation, a claim is meaningless. The documentation exists. I have it at home. Then I suggest you produce it for review by the county clerk. Until then, Mr. Henshaw is prepared to take this matter to court if necessary. However, in the interest of avoiding lengthy and expensive legal proceedings, he is willing to allow you to continue using the water, provided you sign an agreement acknowledging his ownership and paying a reasonable annual fee." "This is extortion," Ethan said flatly. "This is business, Mr. Quinn," Rutherford replied. "Miss Turner has 3 days to decide. After that, Mr. Henshaw will file a formal complaint and seek an injunction preventing any use of the creek water pending resolution of the case." He tipped his hat and left. Penelope stared at the papers he had left behind, her mind racing. "He is lying," she said finally. "These documents have to be forgeries. My father's claim is valid." "Then we prove it," Ethan said. "Where are the original documents? At home in my father's safe." Penelope felt panic rising. "But what if something happened to them? What if they were destroyed in the house?" "Then we find other proof," Ethan said firmly. "There must be copies somewhere. The county clerk, the land office, somewhere." They thanked Mr. Peterson and rode hard back to the ranch. At the house, Penelope opened the old safe that sat in the corner of her father's study. Inside were the documents she had shown Ethan that first day, along with other papers related to the ranch. But as she looked through them more carefully, she realized with growing horror that the most important document, the original claim to the water rights, was not there. She remembered seeing it months ago after her father's death, but now it was gone. "Someone took it," she whispered. "When they came into the barn that night, they must have come into the house too. They took the original claim." Ethan put his hands on her shoulders. "Breathe, Penelope, just breathe. We will figure this out." "How? Without that document, I have no proof. Henshaw's fake claim will stand and I will lose everything. We will ride to the county seat tomorrow. We will find records there. Your father would have filed copies." Ethan tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "Do not give up, not now." That night they barely slept. Ethan kept watch while Penelope tried to rest, but her mind would not quiet. Everything her father had worked for, everything she had fought to defend, could be taken away by forged documents and lies. The injustice of it burned in her chest. At first light, they saddled fresh horses and prepared for the long ride to the county seat in San Angelo. It was 40 miles away, which would take most of the day. As they were about to leave, Sheriff Coleman rode up to the property. "Thought I would find you here," he said. "Heard about Henshaw's lawyer. I am riding to San Angelo too to do some checking of my own. Figured we might ride together." The presence of the sheriff felt like a blessing. Together, the three of them made good time, arriving in San Angelo by mid-afternoon. The county clerk's office was a small building near the courthouse, and the clerk himself was an elderly man named Horace Patterson, who remembered Samuel Turner. "Good man, Sam Turner," Patterson said, adjusting his spectacles. "Came through here regular to keep his paperwork in order." "What can I help you with?" Penelope explained the situation while Patterson listened, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When she finished, he went to his files and began searching. 15 minutes later, he returned with a puzzled look. "This is strange," he said. "I have a notation that shows Sam Turner filed water rights documents in 1864, but the actual documents are not here. There is just a notation that they were removed for review in 1878. "Removed by whom?" Sheriff Coleman asked. Patterson checked his records. "Does not say, which is unusual. Normally, any document removal would include a signature and reason." "What about Henshaw's claim?" Ethan asked. Patterson searched again and found the documents matching what the lawyer had shown them. "These were filed 6 months ago, dated 1870 but filed recently." "Is that normal?" Penelope asked. "Not really. Usually people file claims promptly to establish the date. Filing something years after the supposed date raises questions. Questions like whether the documents are genuine," Sheriff Coleman suggested. "I cannot make accusations without proof," Patterson said carefully. "But I can say that something about this whole situation does not sit right with me." They left the clerk's office with more questions than answers. Sheriff Coleman suggested they check with the Territorial Land Office as well, but it had closed for the day. They would have to stay overnight in San Angelo and continue searching in the morning. That evening, Penelope, Ethan, and the sheriff had dinner at a small restaurant. Over stew and bread, they strategized. "Even if we prove Henshaw's documents are fake, we still need to prove your father's claim is real," Coleman said. "Without the original documents, that could be difficult." "There must be someone who remembers," Penelope said. "Someone who was there when my father filed his claim." "That was 20 years ago," Coleman pointed out gently. "A lot of people have moved on or passed away." Penelope felt despair creeping in again, but Ethan took her hand under the table, squeezing gently. The simple gesture steadied her. "We will keep looking," Ethan said. "We have not exhausted every option yet." They spent the night at a modest boarding house, Penelope in one room and the men sharing another. Despite her exhaustion, Penelope could not sleep. Finally, around midnight, she gave up and went downstairs to the small sitting room. She found Ethan there, sitting by the window, looking out at the dark street. "Could not sleep either," she asked quietly. "Kept thinking about what happens if we cannot prove your claim," he admitted. "Where we go from here?" Penelope sat beside him. "I've been thinking about that too, and I realized something. Even if I lose the land, even if Henshaw wins, I have already gained something more valuable." "What is that?" "You," she said simply. "I found you, or you found me. Either way, you showed me that I do not have to face everything alone. That there are still good people in the world willing to stand up for what is right. That there is still love and hope and possibility. Even if I lose this fight, I have not lost everything." Ethan turned to face her fully, his expression tender. "You are not going to lose. I will not let that happen." "You cannot promise that." Maybe not, but I can promise that I will be beside you no matter what happens. If we win, I will help you work that land and make it thrive. If we lose, we will find another place, start over together. Either way, we face it together. Together, Penelope repeated. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet. When she pulled back, she whispered, "I love you, Ethan Quinn." "I love you too, Penelope Turner," he replied. "More than I thought possible to love anyone." They sat together in the quiet boarding house, holding each other, drawing strength from their connection. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The next morning, they visited the territorial land office, but the result was the same as the county clerk's office. There were notations of Samuel Turner's claim, but the actual documents were missing. The clerk suggested they try the state archives in Austin, but that was a week's journey and they had run out of time. On the ride back to Sweetwater, they were all quiet, each lost in thought. Sheriff Coleman finally broke the silence. "I have been thinking about this situation," he said. "Those missing documents are too convenient. Someone went to a lot of trouble to remove evidence of your father's claim from multiple locations. That takes planning and probably money to bribe clerks or officials." "Henshaw has both," Ethan said. "Yes, but it also means he knows the documents existed. He would not bother removing them otherwise. That is essentially an admission that your claim is valid." "But how do we prove it?" Penelope asked. Coleman was quiet for a moment. "We need to make him admit it, get him to confess somehow." "He would never do that," Penelope said. "He is too smart." "Maybe not him directly, but what about his men? That foreman, Clyde Morrison, he strikes me as the type who might brag after a few drinks. Or that lawyer, Rutherford. These men are human. They make mistakes." It was a slim hope, but it was something. When they reached Sweetwater, Coleman promised to keep his ears open in the saloons and around town. Meanwhile, Penelope and Ethan returned to the ranch to wait out the deadline Henshaw had given them. The next day passed slowly. They tried to work on the windmill, but both found it hard to concentrate. That evening, as the sun was setting, they sat on the porch together, Penelope's head on Ethan's shoulder. "What will you do?" Ethan asked quietly. "When the deadline passes tomorrow?" "I will not sign his agreement," Penelope said firmly. "I will not give him the satisfaction of making me acknowledge a false claim. If he wants to take this to court, let him. Maybe a judge will see through his lies." "That could take months, even years," Ethan said. "And cost money you do not have. I know, but I will not surrender without a fight." She lifted her head to look at him. "Will you stay? Even if this gets long and difficult?" "I already told you," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "I am not going anywhere." They were still sitting there as darkness fell when they saw a horse approaching. Ethan was on his feet immediately, rifle in hand, but as the rider got closer they recognized Sheriff Coleman. He dismounted quickly, his expression excited. "You need to come to town right now," he said. "Both of you, I think I have something." They saddled horses quickly and rode back to Sweetwater with Coleman. He led them not to his office but to the church, where they found Pastor Reynolds waiting for them. "Pastor," Penelope said, confused, "what is this about?" The elderly pastor smiled gently. "Sheriff Coleman came to see me this evening with some questions about your father. I told him what I remembered, and he thought you should hear it directly." "What did you remember?" Penelope asked, hope flickering in her chest. "I came to Sweetwater in 1863, same year as your father," the pastor explained. "We became friends. I remember very clearly when he filed his claim to the water rights, because he asked me to witness the documents as a notary. I still have my notary book from those years." He produced an old leather-bound ledger. Opening it carefully, he showed them an entry dated June 15, 1864. It listed Samuel Turner's name, the the description of the water rights claim, and Pastor Reynolds' signature as witness and notary. "This proves my father filed the claim," Penelope said, her voice shaking. "More than that," Sheriff Coleman said. "It provides a dated, witnessed record that predates Henshaw's supposed claim by 6 years. Even without the original documents, this notary record should be enough to establish prior claim." Penelope felt tears running down her face. "Why did you not mention this before?" "I did not know there was a question about it until tonight," Pastor Reynolds said kindly. "When the sheriff explained what Henshaw was trying to do, I knew I had to help." They spent the next hour at the pastor's home, carefully documenting everything and making copies of the notary record. Penelope could barely believe their luck. Just when everything seemed lost, they had found proof. The next morning, which was the deadline Henshaw had given, Penelope and Ethan rode to Henshaw's ranch with Sheriff Coleman and the notary records. They were met at the main house by Clyde Morrison, who looked surprised to see the sheriff with them. "We are here to see Mr. Henshaw," Coleman said firmly. They were shown into a large study where Henshaw sat behind an ornate desk, his lawyer Rutherford standing beside him. When Henshaw saw who had arrived, his expression shifted from confident to wary. "Sheriff Coleman, what a surprise," Henshaw said smoothly. "And Miss Turner, I assume you are here to sign the agreement." "No," Penelope said, stepping forward. She placed the notary records on his desk. "I am here to inform you that I have proof of my father's water rights claim, dated June 15, 1864. These records are from Pastor Reynolds, who served as notary on the original documents. They establish beyond question that my father's claim predates your supposed claim by 6 years." Henshaw picked up the papers, his face darkening as he read. Rutherford looked over his shoulder, and Penelope saw the lawyer's expression shift to alarm. "This does not prove anything," Henshaw said finally. "You still do not have the original documents." "No, but we have witnessed, notarized records of those documents," Sheriff Coleman said, "which, under Texas law, carry the same weight as the originals in establishing the date and terms of a claim. And we know that someone removed the original documents from both the county clerk's office and the territorial land office. We also know that whoever did that committed a crime. Multiple crimes, actually. Theft of government records, forgery, fraud." "You cannot prove I had anything to do with that," Henshaw said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Maybe not directly," Coleman agreed. "But I can investigate. I can question the clerks, see if anyone remembers you or your men visiting those offices. I can check if any of them suddenly came into unexpected money. And I can make sure a judge knows about all these convenient coincidences." Henshaw and his lawyer exchanged glances. Rutherford leaned down and whispered something in Henshaw's ear. The cattle baron's face went through several expressions, ending on barely contained fury. "What do you want?" Henshaw finally asked. "Nothing," Penelope said. "Except for you to leave me alone. Stop harassing me, stop damaging my property, stop trying to take what is legally mine." "Fine," Henshaw spat. He pulled the fake documents toward him and began tearing them up. "But you are making a mistake, Miss Turner. You could have taken my money and started fresh somewhere easier. Instead, you will spend the rest of your life scraping by on that worthless piece of land." "That land is not worthless to me," Penelope said. "And I would rather scrape by on what is mine than live comfortably on what I gained through surrender." They left Henshaw's ranch with Sheriff Coleman grinning widely. "Did you see his face when you put those records down? That was worth every minute of this whole mess." Back at the ranch, Penelope and Ethan celebrated quietly, just the two of them on the porch as the sun set. They held each other close, barely able to believe that the threat that had hung over them for so long was finally gone. "So what happens now?" Ethan asked. "Do you still need a hired hand?" Penelope pulled back to look at him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes. "Are you asking if I still want you here? I suppose I am. The danger has passed. I would understand if you want to go back to managing the ranch on your own." "Ethan Quinn, you are an idiot," Penelope said fondly. "I do not want you here because I need protection from Henshaw. I want you here because I love you, because I cannot imagine working this land without you beside me. Because you have become part of this place, part of my life, and I do not want that to change." "I do not want it to change either," Ethan said, relief evident in his voice. "But I have to ask, Penelope, what are we to each other? I work for you, but we are clearly more than employer and employee. We love each other, but we have never talked about what that means for the future." Penelope took a deep breath. "What do you want it to mean?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, then he stood up and held out his hand. When she took it, he pulled her to her feet and then, to her complete surprise, dropped to one knee. "I do not have a ring yet," he said. "And maybe this is too fast, maybe we should wait, but life is short and uncertain, and I have learned that when you find something real, you hold on to it. Penelope Turner, you are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever met. You are my home, my purpose, my joy. Will you marry me?" Penelope felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Ethan stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and promise of their future together. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at once, Penelope felt like her heart might burst from joy. "I cannot believe this is real," she said. "A month ago I was alone, fighting a battle I was sure I would lose. Now I have won and I have you. It feels like a dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Ethan said. He cupped her face gently. "We will build a good life here, Penelope, together." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Sweetwater, with Pastor Reynolds officiating and half the town in attendance. Penelope wore her mother's wedding dress, which fit perfectly after some minor alterations. Ethan wore a new suit, purchased with his wages, and looked so handsome that Penelope could barely tear her eyes away from him during the ceremony. Sheriff Coleman stood as a witness, along with Mr. Peterson and his wife. Even some of the neighboring ranchers attended, including a few who had previously been afraid to openly support Penelope against Henshaw. With the water rights settled, and Henshaw's power over the community broken, people felt free to show their true feelings. The ceremony was simple but perfect. When Pastor Reynolds pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Penelope with such tenderness that several of the ladies in attendance wiped their eyes. At the small reception afterward, held in the church fellowship hall, there was music and dancing and more happiness than Penelope had felt since before her father's death. As they danced together, Ethan whispered in her ear, "Happy, Mrs. Quinn." "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied. They spent their wedding night at the ranch house that was now truly theirs, both of them. Ethan had moved his few belongings from the bunkhouse into the main house that morning, and seeing his things mixed with hers felt right in a way that made Penelope's heart swell. Their first months as a married couple were busy and productive. Together, they finished rebuilding the windmill and made improvements to the barn and fences. Ethan proved to be not just a hard worker, but an innovative thinker, suggesting changes that made the ranch operate more efficiently. Penelope found that working alongside her husband was different from working alongside an employee. They were partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through difficulties, celebrating successes as shared victories. The ranch began to thrive. With 2 people working it consistently, they were able to expand the herd and improve the breeding stock. The income increased, allowing them to make further improvements and even hire occasional help during busy seasons. True to his word, Henshaw left them alone. He remained a powerful presence in the region, but he seemed to accept that he had lost this particular battle. Occasionally they would see him in town, and he would nod politely if coldly. It was not friendship, but it was peace, and that was enough. As winter approached, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening as they sat by the fire, his arm around her shoulders. "Are you certain?" he asked, wonder and joy mixing in his expression. "As certain as I can be. We are going to have a baby, Ethan." He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "I cannot believe it. A child, our child." "Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though she could feel his joy radiating through his embrace. Happy does not begin to describe it. Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of it at once. He pulled back to look at her. "You are going to be such a wonderful mother." "And you are going to be a wonderful father," she said. The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope struggled with sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the physical work of the ranch became increasingly difficult. But Ethan was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on more of the heavy work, insisting she rest when she needed to, and generally treating her like she was made of glass. "I am pregnant, not dying," she protested one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a bucket of feed. "I know, but I worry," he admitted. "You and this baby are everything to me. I cannot lose you." His vulnerability touched her. "You are not going to lose me. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am strong and healthy. We are going to be fine." And they were. In early June of 1885, with the help of a midwife from town and Ethan pacing anxiously outside, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel, after her father, and called him Sam. Holding her son for the first time, with Ethan sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders and his eyes wet with tears, Penelope felt a completeness she had never experienced before. This was her family. This was what she had fought for, what her father had wanted for her. Not just the land, but the life it could provide, the freedom to choose her own path, to love whom she wanted, to build something lasting. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, gently touching Sam's tiny hand. "He is ours," Penelope said, and that was all that mattered. The next few years were full and busy. Sam grew from a tiny baby into a curious toddler, always exploring, always getting into things. Penelope and Ethan took turns watching him while managing the ranch, which now employed 2 full-time hands to help with the increased workload. They added on to the house, building 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The Turner Quinn Ranch, as it became known, developed a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. They were never wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Sam was 3, Penelope gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Ethan's mother. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas. The house was filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of children, and Penelope could not imagine life any other way. Ethan proved to be as wonderful a father as she had known he would be. He was patient with the children's endless questions, firm when discipline was needed, but mostly just present in a way that meant everything. He taught Sam to ride almost before the boy could walk, told Margaret stories every night, and carried Thomas on his shoulders while checking the cattle. One evening, when the children were finally asleep and they had a rare moment of quiet, Penelope and Ethan sat on the porch together, watching the sun set over their land. She leaned against him, content. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "The life you could have had if you had kept drifting. The places you could have seen." "Not for a single moment," Ethan said firmly. I saw enough places. None of them meant anything because they were not home. This is home. You are home. I found everything I was looking for the day I rode into Sweetwater, even though I did not know I was looking for it. I am glad you followed those men that morning, Penelope said. Glad you decided to help a stubborn woman defend her water rights. Best decision I ever made, Ethan said. He kissed her temple. Though you did make me work for it, Penelope laughed. Someone had to keep you on your toes. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching their land spread out before them. The creek still flowed through the eastern pasture, providing water for their cattle and crops. The windmill turned slowly in the breeze, pumping water up from the well. In the barn, the horses nickered softly as they settled for the night. Everything was as it should be. Sheriff Coleman had retired the previous year, with his deputy taking over. Mr. Peterson's oldest son had taken over the general store. Pastor Reynolds still preached on Sundays, though he moved slower now, his hair completely white. Life in Sweetwater continued its steady pace, and the Turner-Quinn family was woven into its fabric. Henshaw had died 2 years earlier, and his ranch had been divided among his children, who were less interested in expansion than their father had been. The threat he had once posed was now just a memory, a story told to illustrate the importance of standing up for what was right, even against powerful opposition. As the years passed, Sam grew into a fine young man, serious and thoughtful like his mother, with his father's easy way with animals. Margaret was bright and curious, always reading, always asking questions about how things worked. Thomas was the wild one, fearless and adventurous, keeping his parents constantly worried and amused. When Sam was 16, he asked his father to teach him everything about managing the ranch. Ethan spent hours with him, riding the property, explaining about breeding and grazing and water management. Penelope watched them together and saw her father in Sam, the same dedication to the land, the same understanding that they were stewards of something larger than themselves. One evening at dinner, with the whole family gathered around the table, Sam made an announcement. "I have been thinking about my future," he said. "I know some people might expect me to go to college or see the world, but this ranch is what I want. This is where I belong. If you will have me, I want to work the land with you and eventually take over when you are ready to slow down." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. She reached across the table to take Sam's hand. "Your grandfather would be so proud of you. I am so proud of you. Of course we will have you. This has always been your legacy." Margaret announced that she wanted to be a teacher, which surprised no one given her love of learning. Thomas declared he wanted to be a cowboy, which made everyone laugh because he essentially already was one. Ethan raised his glass of water. "To the future," he said. "To all the possibilities ahead of us and to the family we have built together." They all clinked glasses, and Penelope looked around the table at her husband and children, at the life they had created from struggle and determination and love. She thought about that morning so many years ago when a stranger had ridden onto her property and changed everything. She thought about standing on her porch with her father's rifle, ready to defend what was hers, never imagining that the man who appeared would become her partner in every sense of the word. The water still flowed through Sweetwater Creek, clear and cold and constant. The land still stretched out under the Texas sky, beautiful and harsh and full of promise. And the Turner-Quinn family still worked it together, living the life that Samuel Turner had dreamed of when he first filed his claim all those years ago. Penelope had fought for her water rights and won, but what she had really won was so much more than legal access to a creek. She had won her freedom, her independence, her right to choose her own path. And she had found love with a cowboy who stood beside her against the powerful, who never wavered, who became her partner and husband and father to her children. As night fell over the ranch and the stars came out one by one, Penelope sat on the porch with Ethan's arm around her, just as they had so many evenings over the years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new small joys and sorrows. But tonight was perfect, complete enough. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too," Ethan replied. "Every day more than the day before." And that, Penelope thought, was the real legacy her father had given her. Not just land or water rights, but the freedom to find this love, this life, this happiness. Everything else had been worth fighting for because it led to this moment, this family, this perfect peace. The story of how a woman defended her water rights alone, and the cowboy who stood beside her against the powerful, had become the story of their lives, woven together inextricably. And as they sat together on their porch, watching their land settle into darkness, they knew that the fight had been worth it. Every moment of fear and struggle had led them here, to this life they had built together, and they would not change a single thing. Their children grew, married, and had children of their own. Sam brought his wife to live on the ranch and slowly took over more of the management as Ethan and Penelope aged. Margaret became a beloved teacher in Sweetwater, educating a new generation of children. Thomas did indeed become a cowboy, working on various ranches before eventually settling on a spread adjacent to the Turner Quinn property with his own family. Ethan and Penelope lived to see their grandchildren grow, to watch the ranch continue to thrive under Sam's management, to witness Sweetwater grow from a small town into a small city. They sat on their porch on summer evenings and winter afternoons, holding hands, telling stories about the early days to grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. When Ethan passed away at the age of 72, peacefully in his sleep with Penelope beside him, she mourned deeply, but without regret. They had been given nearly 50 years together, years filled with love and laughter and hard work and triumph. She had never spent a single day wishing for a different life or a different partner. Penelope lived another 5 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that everything she and Ethan had built would continue. She spent her final days in the house they had shared, surrounded by family, looking out at the land they had defended together. On a quiet morning in late spring, with Sweetwater Creek flowing steady and strong, Penelope Turner Quinn closed her eyes for the last time. Her children and grandchildren gathered around her, holding her hands, telling her it was all right to rest now. She had fought the good fight, lived a full life, and left a legacy that would endure for generations. They buried her beside Ethan on a small hill overlooking the ranch with her father's grave nearby. The headstone read, "Penelope Turner Quinn, 1860–1938. She stood her ground and built a legacy, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and friend." The Turner Quinn Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Sam's line, always kept in the family, always worked with the same dedication and love that Penelope and Ethan had brought to it. The story of the woman who defended her water rights and the cowboy who stood beside her became family legend, told and retold, inspiring new generations to stand up for what was right, to fight for what they believed in, and to recognize love when it appeared, even in the most unexpected circumstances. The water still flows through Sweetwater Creek, clear and constant, a testament to the battle fought for it so many years ago. The land still stretches under the Texas sky, beautiful and enduring. And somewhere, in the whisper of the wind through the cottonwoods and the soft sound of water moving over stone, the love story of Penelope and Ethan lives on, eternal and complete, A reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and that the greatest victories often come from standing beside someone you love against impossible odds.